Good afternoon to our viewers in Europe and good morning to our viewers in the United States. I'm Steve Sokol, and I serve as the president of the American Council on Germany. Thank you for joining us on this solemn day. A year ago today, an unprecedented attack by Hamas on a music festival in Israel provoked a year of violence in Gaza, and this has led to spiraling conflict throughout the region. There are many topics that we could discuss as we reflect on the past year and as we look to the future, but today we'd like to focus on the global spike in anti-Semitism since the October 7th attacks and what can be done to address this. Let me provide a little bit of context. In the United States, the FBI reported a 63% increase in anti-Semitic hate crimes over 2022. And in Germany, the monitoring group RIAS reported that anti-Semitic incidents rose by over 80% in 2023, reaching a new high since RIAS started keeping track in 2017. We're joined today by somebody who has studied these trends and who spent some time in Germany earlier this year as the inaugural Gail Hodges-Burt Scholar at the American Academy in Berlin. And in late September, she also completed a tour of several of the ACG's Eric M. Warburg chapters to talk about what she learned while she was in Berlin. Dr. Sharon Nazarian is a leader in combating anti-Semitism and a champion of human rights. She currently serves as the president of the Y&S Nazarian Family Foundation, and previously she was the senior vice president for international affairs at the Anti-Defamation League. Throughout her career, she studied how the rise in anti-Semitism can be seen as an indicator of the waning health of democracy, and I'm sure that that's something that we'll get into today. Sharon, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Stephen, so much. And I really appreciate ACG hosting me today on this somber day and also giving me the opportunity to visit some of your chapters across America. It was really an eye-opening experience. I do want to also thank the American Academy in Berlin for hosting me the whole month of May, where I really had the opportunity to do a deep dive in understanding contemporary anti-Semitism in Germany today.
And these are, obviously some issues that I'd like to sort of unpack today and explore a little bit further with you. Just before we went live just now, I mentioned that I was struck when we saw each other in New York just a couple of weeks ago, that you said since October 7th, all of our lives have changed, and added that the concept of Jewish security has to be viewed now through a global lens and not just as a local issue. We can't just look at isolated incidents of anti-Semitic violence. Can you maybe set the stage for us and talk a little bit about sort of the spike in anti-Semitism that we've seen over the course of the last year, but B, a little bit more about how all of our lives have changed, and then we can talk a little bit about what we might be able to do about that.
Okay, Steve, thank you. Well, we can see that over the last year, if you look at anti-Semitic incidents, and you referenced the FBI hate crimes, but if you look at every Jewish community, and especially in democracies across the globe, the data that they've been posting is that there is at least a triple-digit percentage increase in anti-Semitic incidents. Now, when we look at what those incidents look like, Steve, what is really baffling is the uniformity of the kinds of incidents that are taking place. So you mentioned RIAS's data in Germany. If you look at the highest spike and where those incidents took place in Germany, it was from K to 12 schools and universities, and then in public transport, trains, buses, public transportation. That very same trend you can see across the globe, from Australia to Europe to Latin America to Canada. I would add to that beyond just physical acts of anti-Semitism, it's also the bullying, it's also the isolation of Jewish students on campuses, it is also the targeting of Jewish businesses. It is also the fact that today, on this very somber day, Steve, every single Jewish institution in the world has tripled its physical security for today. So what has happened is this uniform experience of Jewish existence that went from largely safe, secure, integrated community to an insecure, unsafe, where parents have to think about their daughters and sons stepping out of the house, walking to school or going to university campus, and if they're visibly Jewish, whether they need to cover their skull cap, their kippah, whether the daughters should be wearing their Star of David. So these were things that we just thought we had left behind. See, we just didn't think that in 2024, as members of Jewish communities in democracies, with all the constitutional protection our democracies give us, that we should be considering these kind of questions for our families and for our communities. So the uniformity, the fact that it is truly global, the fact that same families, same communities are reacting in the same way, that is just unprecedented for us in a way I hadn't seen before.
I mean, of course, it's not as if prior to October 7th, there weren't these signs of anti-Semitism, right? I mean, it's something that we've seen in many of the countries and regions that you described. Certainly, it's something that has been seen in Europe, it's been seen in the US. And it's not as if that was completely eliminated. But what I find striking about what you're saying is just how in the public sphere, this sense of anti-Semitism and physical acts, yes, but also, as you say, the bullying and the marginalization of a community can be felt. To think about this at the school level, at universities, in the public sphere and public transportation, and that's not unique to one country from what you're saying, but that these are the stages where this anti-Semitism plays out. What's the response of bystanders when they observe this kind of behavior?
Well, Steve, I would say there were two issues that are really, as you are absolutely right to point out, this didn't just start on October 7th. And we at ADL have been monitoring, and I mean, ADL is a 110-year-old organization, the most reliable civil society organization that puts out annual audits of anti-Semitic incidents in the US and now globally. What happened since October 7th is the scale. So it's just the scale that just gone through the roof. So the spike is like this. And then the normalization. So the fact that it's become ubiquitous and it's kind of accepted or expected, maybe is the right word for it to happen. And the reaction of the communities that we live in has also been surprising. Now, I can tell you from the work that I've done at ADL and ADL has done for generations, our coalition work was always fundamental and instrumental to the advocacy that we, the Jewish community, and ADL also has done. ADL is an anti-hate organization. So the work that it did was combating all forms of hate. On October 8th, Steve, we found ourselves very much alone. We found ourselves isolated, and the coalition partners that we had combat so much hate together, whether it was the civil rights movement, whether it was anti-hooding laws against KKK in America that ADL actually wrote, whether it was, for LGBT community. The fact that the Nova Festival that you mentioned, where women were raped, brutally assaulted, murdered, and most feminist organizations around the world did not step up on October 8th and call that out. The fact that the LGBT community didn't, the fact that so many of our coalition partners felt pressured not to call out the atrocity. That's all the expectation that I think the Jewish community had, even before Israel went into Gaza to defend itself. There was a period of silence. And that was heartbreaking, I think, for most Jews and for those of us who have been in that space, in those battles with all our coalition partners fighting these bigger battles. So, but I can tell you that on the streets and in our communities, we've had plenty of allies, private people who've stepped up. And that is heartwarming. And I also see new allies. I see other communities who understand that the threat today to the Jewish community is not just targeted at the Jewish community. And I'll give you a very good example. I'm an Iranian American. I was born in Iran. My family was forced to leave because of the Islamic Revolution of 1979. And like many of my brothers and sisters from Iran, we have now landed, blessed enough to be landed here in America. And I grew up here in the US, studied here. And we have a very large size Iranian American community across America and across Europe. Since October 7th, the one community that has vocally and strongly supported Israel and its right to defend itself is the Iranian American community and the Iranian European community, because they understand what happened on October 7th was supported, paid for, and pushed by the Iranian regime. Mm-hmm. That regime's nefarious work, not only in oppressing its own population, whether it's the women of Iran who are, shot in the eye or in prison because their hijab is somehow not worn properly, or other ethnic minorities or religious minorities in Iran. But if you look at the regime's influence throughout the Middle East, it is the most expansive regime right now in the Middle East, where its fingerprints are all over Syria, Iraq, Lebanon, Yemen. As we speak right now, Yemen just shot another surface-to-air missile to Israel. And then Gaza and West Bank. So Iranian Americans and Iranians living in Europe in diaspora understand that regime like no other people do. And so they have come and joined hands with Jews and Israelis across the world to say, we know the threat, we understand the core of that threat, and the Iranian regime and Russia and China, these bad actors who are coming into our democracies, not only causing havoc by dividing us through disinformation, misinformation, but also pushing an agenda of American hatred, of hatred for our flag, hatred for one another. Mm-hmm. And they're at the core of it, and they stand to win. And that's why when I talk about democracy, we need to understand the bigger picture here. Steve, the world we're in today, it's about authoritarianism versus democracy. And they've now come into our society and made us believe that we're weak, that we shouldn't trust our own institutions, whether it's our election process or our democratic institutions of checks and balances. They've made us question ourselves. And so they're winning at this moment.
Let me just pick up on that last point, because it ties in sort of with the political environment that we're in at the moment, the polarization of politics. And I guess I'd be interested in hearing your thoughts on the rise in political extremism on the national level, and how far right and far left ideologies contribute to this rise in anti-Semitism, and whether there's anything that we can do at the national level to try to isolate some of these trends when it comes to far right and left politics.
Steve, I think, and this is a place where we really look to Europe first as Americans, was this rising extremism period, right, in our political sphere. And Germany is a perfect example, with the rise in AfD in Germany, really taking center stage in political discourse, and the success that AfD has had now in some of the eastern states, and the worry of many German citizens about what's to come in the next federal elections. That is one part of the agenda we have to look at. Now, we saw also in the UK with the rise of Jeremy Corbyn and kind of hijacking the Labour Party, the far left began its own ascension of bringing the anti-capitalist, anti-colonialist agenda, a lot of times Stalinist agenda, which was mired in anti-Semitism. And then we had the Islamic terrorist, ISIS, I would say Muslim Brotherhood kind of ideology. So for the last decade, Europe kind of embodied this perfect storm of the normalization of extremism in our political discourse and in our daily lives from all sides, right, left, and Islamists. We have that now in America. And I think that is really the moment we're feeling it in Canada. If you've seen what has been happening across Canadian cities and across America, New York, Los Angeles, where I'm at, and every major city, is that these extremist ideologies are not only present at the same time, but they're influencing one another. They're mimicking one another. They're picking each other's memes and using it. I mean, the far right groups in America used the GoPro videos that Hamas terrorists shot themselves that day on October 7th last year. And they're using those videos and turning into memes to push their own anti-Semitic agenda. So this kind of coming a horseshoe effect of the far right and far left coming to kind of essentially an authoritarian, illiberal ideals and bringing that into our society is a threat that we all have to understand. And we have to understand that it's about extremist ideology. And this is what we're witnessing today in America as well as across the democratic world.
So it's almost a weaponization of anti-Semitism as a tool to achieve their political goals.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And again, just another reference from what I saw in Germany, because I know your audience is especially interested in kind of German trends. When you see AfD coin the term imported anti-Semitism as part of their rhetoric of targeting migrants, immigrants from the Middle East and other places, that is exactly the weaponization. Because what that says is that we in Germany don't have anti-Semitism. It is only the migrants and immigrants and refugees who are coming that are bringing any anti-Semitism that we see in Germany today. And that is a disservice because, of course, anti-Semitism exists in Germany, whether you have migrants or not. And so that weaponization, as you just pointed out, is critically important for us to recognize and not allow. And then the other point to your question is very important. We need to look at anti-Semitism in our own camps. We need to call out extremist ideology in our own camps. And here in the US, whether it's the Republican Party or the Democratic Party, and believe me, we have it across the board. We have extremists in both political parties today that are weaponizing the hatred, that are weaponizing the divisions that we're all feeling and the anxiety that we're feeling. So that populist agenda is not dominated by one party alone. I would argue that former President Trump is definitely utilizing that populist agenda to put the finger kind of on the anxiety that most American citizens are feeling and trying to use that in his own political favor. And he's done it with the Jewish community, where on one hand, he says, I'm here to protect you. I'm going to be a strong supporter of Israel. On the other hand, he says, if I lose, you bear the responsibility. And that essentially is putting a target on the back of every Jewish person, because we saw what happened on January 6th. So if his strong extremist base feels that it were the Jews who made him lose, then we are deeply, deeply in danger, and we know what they're capable of. So we have to hold our politicians to task, and we have to stop it in our own camp when we see it, before we point fingers to the other side.
Coming into the conversation today, I was planning on asking you which sort of forms of expression of anti-Semitism you find the most concerning today. But from our conversation over the past few minutes, it sounds as if the scale is important because of October 7th, but it's really this normalization in society that this is almost acceptable behavior that I'm hearing as such a real concern, because that's, of course, harder to address and harder to combat.
Steve, today, across America and across the world, vigils are being held to commemorate October 7th. At the same time, at least 20 American university campuses, and I can tell you this is true in Australia, it is true across Europe, there are anti-October 7th protests being held where they're celebrating October 7th. Celebrating October 7th. The murder, the largest number of murder of Jews in history since October 7th, since the Holocaust in one day. So when we have that on American campuses today, where not only the flags of Hamas and Hezbollah are being lifted, but the signs that are being held up is we are celebrating October 7th. And that was a day of resistance. Then we're in deep trouble. And that's when you said, that's exactly to your reference of normalization. That's what American students are being, facing today, whether Jewish or not Jewish. And that terror, barbaric act is resistance, and it is normalized, and it is being heralded today. So it is the normalization that is, because hate has always existed. But this most of our last 80 years since World War II, it was pushed to the fringes in the dark corners of our society. And it was not behavior that was acceptable in, let's say, polite society. Steve, that's no longer true.
Mhm.
The social cost of being openly anti-Semitic has just gone down. There is no cost anymore for being openly anti-Semitic. And if you want to use Israel and anti-Israel hatred as your vehicle for being anti-Semitic, it is completely acceptable. And across academia and much of the art world and much of other parts of literary world, it is actually virtue signaling that I'm standing up. And so we have turned everything upside down in a way. And in a way, we have to understand that these are not the right direction. This is, if you want to be an activist for Palestinian rights, which I am personally, I believe in a Palestinian right to self-determination, to live with dignity and safety in their own state. Hamas is not it. Hamas is an oppressor of Palestinians. And it's a terror organization that terrorizes Palestinians. So I think we're seeing these trends that are just, it feels like the world is turned upside down.
So what, I mean, particularly since, one of the battlefields where this is playing out is K to 12 schools and college campuses, as you've described, what role can or should education play in addressing anti-Semitism? Obviously education, not just in the classroom, but writ large. How can we give people a deeper, more nuanced understanding about these issues so that they don't fall prey to some of this more extreme rhetoric, whether it's from political groups or whether it's from other extremist organizations?
Well, obviously, as a society, we're all trying to contend with disinformation and misinformation. How do we educate our youth to be more savvy users of not only social media, but all data, all facts that we're finding online? And that's really a task that our educational system has now taken upon itself. And with mixed reviews, we still have to really focus on educating our youth about how do we engage with content to begin with. And also that there are bad actors out there who are trying to hurt you, who are trying, just like my children are adults now, we told them how to go into a store and how to walk in the mall, who to trust and who not to trust, that same level of trust. I think that's very important because TikTok today is the biggest purveyor of conspiracy theories of any platform. And we know that our young children, teenagers, are consuming TikTok, across their day. So that's number one. And by the way, I put that onus also on our governments because I feel that we're not doing enough to hold platforms responsible for their role in their algorithms pushing some of these conspiracy theories. So Europe is definitely ahead of the US in that sense, in putting more restrictions on platforms and the way their algorithms kind of push extremist ideology and conspiracy theories. We in the US are still behind and we have not done enough. And that's another way where we as citizens have to demand that from our political leadership. They're not doing enough. And, Congress is in a stalemate. We have elections coming up, but we as citizens have to demand for the safety of our children. Steve, if you want to open a bottle of medicine today, you have caps that are making childproof. If you get in a car, you have a seatbelt and you have all kinds of safety features. Why is it that these private companies purveying a product have zero safety measures on them? So I just want to really emphasize that for all of society, we have to demand that these products, which is what they are, have to have safety features for our youth and for adults as well, like we do in every product that we have. But going back to schools, Holocaust education has been, through most democracies, a part of middle school and high school education. I mean, Germany's been the gold standard in that. We have to now look at, is that enough or is that the right tool? Because what we're seeing is, yes, Holocaust education is very important, but unless it is made and tethered to current day realities, it is not enough. If we just talk about the past, if we just talk about the history, it is not enough. So we have to talk about, first and foremost, most Germans, most Americans possibly have never met a Jewish person. So go to the fundamentals of where are the citizens of our country, where is the diversity of our country, and where do Jewish citizens fit in? And then from there, talk about the threats facing our communities today.
Mm-hmm.
The Holocaust is a very important and critical teaching moment for us. But I am worried, and that's what I said in the op-ed that I published today, that never is now. It's just not, we can't trust it, that just by studying the Holocaust, we're not going to fall into the same traps again. Steve, we're falling in the same traps again. We have blacklists of Jewish writers, Jewish artists, Jewish musicians. What does that remind you of?
Mm-hmm.
So we're falling in those traps. And just to say, oh, we should learn more about the Holocaust. No, we have to understand what is happening today and speak up today.
So let me maybe push you on that last point, because you just mentioned again that Germany has been seen as the gold standard for Holocaust education. And if I remember correctly, one of the reasons why you wanted to go to Germany in May was because you've seen it as the gold standard when it comes to remembrance and reconciliation and the Holocaust. After spending a month in Germany, after having lots and lots of conversations with people in this particular environment of the post-October 7th world that we live in, do you still feel that Germany is the gold standard, or is maintaining the gold standard when it comes to addressing its past, but also the present?
Steve, I went in really looking for answers, as you just mentioned. By April, I just felt that there were just no good answers, and all the trends were heading in not only the wrong direction, but getting worse. So you're right that I went there looking for answers. And here's what I brought back with me. I mean, first and foremost, we cannot legislate our way out of this. That's what I took back from Germany, because if it were based on laws, Germany is it. It has the most protection for not only the Jewish community in terms of its physical safety, but in terms of Holocaust denial, Holocaust revisionism, any sort of imagery. I mean, for God's sake, from the river to the sea, the phrase is illegal in Germany right now. Now it's being, it's in the courts and it's being challenged, but German government has used its bully pulpit in the most effective way to stand for the state of Israel, its commitment to the state of Israel and to Jewish security. But the trends in Germany are exactly the same as every other democracy. So what we can conclude is that, yes, laws are important. The government and its bully pulpit and the way it uses its voice is important, but it's not enough. And clearly it's not enough, because in Germany, you're seeing the ripple effects of some of its historical responsibility turning into this reluctance to acknowledge that there is anti-Semitism. Either it's being weaponized by AfD, or there are parts of German society that it's too shameful, it is too difficult, too uncomfortable to acknowledge that today in 2024, there are serious trends in rising anti-Semitism in Germany, and we have to do something about it. And the example I want to give is, all the pushback against AfD in German society today. In Berlin, there's almost weekly demonstrations by a coalition of social justice groups, LGBT groups, anti-racism groups, and, they're all coming together, calling out the AfD's xenophobia and hate, right? See, there is no mention of anti-Semitism in these demonstrations. There is never a Jewish leader speaking about the Jewish experience in Germany today. So essentially, they've kind of wiped out this idea of anti-Semitism as part of the hate that Germany is facing, that AfD is weaponizing. So that is very disturbing. And that is not the right way to handle what German responsibility has been and where it's going as a democracy. And so you're right in that. I went looking for answers. I came back with this assessment that it's a whole of society, Steve. Laws are not enough. Even your chancellor or prime minister or president saying the right things is not enough. It has to be a whole of society approach.
So related to that and the whole of society, One of the things that you just touched on, even though and that you've mentioned prior to this, is that the rise in anti-Semitism can also see as a warning signal for the health of a democracy. And you've talked in our conversation today and other events that you've spoken at about the real challenges to democracy. I think you've even gone so far as to say that anti-Semitism is the canary in the coal mine if you think about democracy as that coal mine. So given the alarm bells that are sounding at the moment and the severity of the environment that we're in and the situation that you see, can you talk to us a little bit more about the real challenges to democracy that you see beyond sort of some of the hate speech, some of the allegations that we've seen, but really the structural weaknesses to democracy moving forward?
Well, obviously, as democratic values, protection of minorities is a fundamental right that is afforded every minority in a democracy. So if you have 2% of your population, very small community compared to American population size, feels so insecure and unsafe that they have to take the steps that I've already mentioned in their daily lives, that is a real leading indicator that your democratic protection is not functioning properly. The second point is what we've seen in history is that when such protections are eroding for one group, namely the Jewish community, it doesn't end with the Jewish community. It is heralding, and that's what the notion canary in a coal mine is, that it starts with the Jewish community, but it never ends. So it sets you on a path of erosion of democratic rights and protections that are afforded to your citizens one by one and after another. And of course, Germany was a perfect example of that, during World War II. So it is a leading indicator. As a political scientist, that's the way I'd like to frame it, is a leading indicator that the protections and rights that are guaranteed by our Constitution are starting to erode. And if we tolerate that, and if we accept that the way we're seeing it today in America, in Canada, in Australia, across these democracies, then we can safely assume that the Jewish community will not be the only target and not the only vulnerable community that will be experiencing this loss of protections, and it will lead to others and others. So that's why in the op-ed that I published today is that this is not a Jewish problem. This is a democracy problem. And we have to understand that just like in America, when we had the George Floyd event, and we understood this moment of really looking at institutional racism in our country, and how do we understand the impact it has not only on our police, but in every aspect of our society. This too is a moment for us to understand that if your religious community, a faith minority, such a small minority, is not only being blamed for every ill across society through conspiracies. If you look at, even the hurricane, this horrible Hurricane Helene, there are people, in Congress today that are blaming the Jewish community for somehow this. I mean, it's unfathomable that a member of our Congress can stand up and blame Jews for the weather patterns that caused Helene. I mean, this is a problem for not only the Jewish community, but it's for all of us, that someone today can stand up in Washington and say remarks like that, and somehow it's accepted. So
sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I was just going to say, it's really for all of us to know we're headed in the wrong direction as a society.
Well, so in light of this, all of society or whole of society concept, and that we're all affected by this, it would seem that building alliances is incredibly important. And, one question that I would have for you is how Jewish communities can build alliances with other groups, whether it's other marginalized groups or other faith groups or not, could be other more mainstream groups, but all with the common mission of combating hate in all forms, which includes anti-Semitism, of course.
Look, we have no other choice but to do that, Steve. If we do this all alone and stay in our own silos and keep just fighting our own battle, we're going to lose. The forces are just too strong. And we have to understand, and again, I'm a foreign policies person, so I look at the world through that lens. Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, and Venezuela, all the proxies of Iran that are out there in the world, their success is the failure of our democracy. Because what is the biggest threat to those authoritarian regimes is their own population wanting democracy. We saw that in China with Tiananmen Square. We saw in Iran with the Women Life Freedom or the Green Movement. We've seen in Russia the oppression of any counter threat to Putin, any counter protest. So their success is when we as a democracy don't function, when we don't trust our society. So how do we work together to understand those threats? This is not just about the Jews saying, come protect us. This is about the Jewish community saying, those bad guys are winning if they're targeting us, and the rest of society is accepting that, is accepting the normalization of anti-Jewish hate. That means they're winning. So let's understand the big picture here, is that the strength of our society, by us coming together and fighting extremist ideology, conspiracy theories, and normalization of any hate. See, when ADL was founded in 1913, the founders of ADL said, we have to fight against the defamation of the Jewish people and secure justice and fair treatment for all. That's the 1913 proclamation of the founding of ADL, because the Jewish community then understood that we have to fight all forms of hate in order for our community to be safe as well. And so, unfortunately, while that coalition of partners of fighting hate has been disrupted and divisions have been created, we have to go back and start from scratch and build alliances. As you said, even whether it's with other fringe communities, other vulnerable communities, but also for all of society. Look, the Biden administration came out with a historic first ever national strategy to combat anti-Semitism. Sadly, most people don't know about it because, again, it's about the noise out there. There's so much, and how do you get through the noise of all our feeds, news feeds? But it was a historic plan which said not only every part of our government has to be held accountable for what it is doing to fight anti-Semitism, but every part of American society, the private sector, civil society, academia, and others. Now, many parts of our society have fallen short. I would put academia at the helm of that. They have fallen short in standing up for their Jewish students in the last academic year. What will we do to go forward? And academia has to understand that this is the threat to the very core mission of academic inquiry. If you have faculty coming to classrooms who see the role as activism, even if it's, pro-Palestinian activism, but that activism turns into anti-Semitism and their Jewish students in their classrooms feel unsafe and feel targeted, they are a threat to the very actual pursuit of academic inquiry. So what are universities for then? So there's a lot of reckoning that we have to have with different parts of our community today. And again, as you mentioned, the universities and schools are front and center of this. If schools, if anti-Semitic incidents are taking place in elementary schools today, elementary level, and administrators of those schools are not stepping up, are not showing up and educating their young students about why is that hateful? Why is that something that is not acceptable in our school community? Then we're going to lose this battle. So it's at every level of society that we have to do this. And alliances and coming together and seeing the threats together is core to that.
So given sort of how pervasive this is, right, addressing every level of society, we see anti-Semitism at the community level, we see it at the national level, we see great power competition, if you will, pitting democracies and autocracies against each other. And from what you've said, you see real challenges in every single sector, from academia to business to government, presumably also media, but we haven't talked about that. In every sector, there are these challenges. And so as we sort of start to come to a close here, where do you see the biggest challenges in addressing anti-Semitism? And do you have any recommendations on steps that can be taken to proactively deal with this? Obviously, beyond creating alliances and creating awareness and the educational work, do you have any ideas of things that can be done to try to solve this?
Well, we've talked a lot about allyship. I think this is a moment where we need to acknowledge that we're going to step up for one another, not just because it's the right thing to do, but it is a threat on us. So we have to really embody this idea that all the anxiety that we're all feeling, by the way, not just the Jewish community. If you look at survey data shows that most Americans and most democracies right now, the level of social anxiety among citizens, it is an all-time high. We are anxious for explainable reasons, and social media and traditional media have a big part to play in that. They are essentially putting their finger on those raw nerves that all the realities of whether it's globalization and displacement and the rise of information technologies bringing into our society. So we have to, first of all, have that big picture and say, all right, anti-Semitism is an indicator, but what is underneath it is a much more profound change in our societies, and we have to get our arms around it, and we haven't really done that. So that social anxiety that leads to populist, ideology is something we have to think about. So at the personal level, even today, I'm asking those who are still on and listening, call someone in your family, in your community, in your friends, in your colleagues who are Jewish and say, I see you. I know this is a somber day. I know that most Jewish life has been turned upside down since in the past year. And say that I just see you. I understand the pain. I understand the somberness of that day. And then go to every level in your school. If you're alumni of a college and you see what is happening on that campus, write to the president, write to the administrator, say, this is unacceptable. This is not good for our for our school integrity. If you're on a city council, I mean, part of my trips, Stephen, when I was in Charlotte with ACG, the mayor pro temp of Charlotte said to me, right after October 7th, we saw at our city council meetings, mass demonstrations coming in, demanding that we put pro-Palestinian agenda on our local issues. And then she said, I knew that this was happening across the country at every single city council, mass groups that were violent, so much so that the city council had to be moved. And so she said, there is a pattern to this. There is a system to this. This didn't just happen organically. She's telling me this. And I said, I know. We saw it on campuses as well with the encampments. So at every level of our society, we have to say, we understand these patterns. These are not just organic. This is not just, Palestinians wanting to, to advocate for Palestinian rights. This is a threat entering every part of our society. So at every part of your lives, this will show up. So you need to stand up at this moment and say, this is not acceptable because this is going to be a threat to my protections, my rights.
Sharon, thank you for sort of coming to a close with a call to action for everybody who's on today and everybody who views this. I think it is an important call to action, not just today, but every day, right? I mean, it takes on a particular value and importance today because of the nature of the day and because of the fact that it is such a solemn and somber Memorial Day and because it's unresolved, right? What was set in motion on October 7th is unresolved. And I think for many of us, looking at how events have unfolded since then, it's very, very difficult to see a resolution in short order, but rather an increase in violence and an expansion of the conflict, which we all, of course, hope will not happen. Sharon, I know you have other appointments to go to. I want to thank you for starting the day very early in California and spending some time with us. Any closing comments from
I
you before
really
we?
want to thank ACG for acknowledging this day, for commemorating this day, and for being an ally to the Jewish community. And it is critically important, given the mission of ACG as a body that really wants to strengthen US-German relations, all of that we all have to come together and understand the threats. And I think ACG's acknowledgement of this day, having me on, means the world to me. And I just want to thank you, Steve, and your team, and all those listening in today. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Well, and a huge thanks to you. We really appreciate your taking the time to be with us today. I know that you have a lot of other things that are calling your attention, but we are greatly appreciative to you for talking with us about this important issue, because as we said at the outset, this is not a topic that has just hit the headlines as of a year ago today, but has been a topic under the surface and in front and on top of the surface for many, many years, and one that needs to be addressed. And so we're very happy to be able to continue the conversation with you. We certainly wish you well with your important work moving forward. And thank you again for joining us.
Thank you. And for those listening who are of Jewish faith, I want to wish you a Shana Tova. And hopefully next year will be better.